I got the task of talking about art technology, and I promised that Phil and I did not collaborate. But I feel like people sometimes see art and technology together like this, and they put the names together, put the words together. It's sort of a category error to think of these things as kind of in the same domain. And so I kind of wish this would say something more like this. Because people don't really think, and artists especially are guilty of this, I think, of not really thinking technology through. What they think about technology is, if it's got buttons or lasers, then it's probably technology. But I think it's helpful sometimes to think more broadly about what technology is. So I want to talk a little bit more broadly about it and then focus back in and talk about a specific kind of technology, a specific kind of art making. First point, technology is not new. In fact, it's really, really old. And how old? So we already saw some of these, only these are even older. These are Oldowan artifacts. These are about 2.6 million years old from Africa. And one of my favorite writers about contemporary design and future design is a guy named Bruce Sterling. And he makes the point that in the relationship that we have with technology as humans, that really we're the junior partner. Technology was first. In other words, there was technology before there were people. This is really interesting because it implies, in a sense, then, that all art, which we think of as a human endeavor, is technological to some degree. Except, of course, there are apparently some elephants who paint. I don't want to get all techno-deterministic on you, but I do want to bring this up. There's this fellow that you may know, Marshall McLuhan, who's a Canadian media theorist, and he's the one who popularized this idea that all of our technologies are somehow an extension of our body into the world. That may be kind of obvious, but if you really take this seriously, the implications are kind of interesting. Let's see sort of what he was talking about. In the most simplest sense, if you grab something like a stick in your hand, it extends your reach and it amplifies the force that you can apply, for instance, to a friend's head. This is a Victorian parlor game that was apparently really popular in Europe, where the participants would be blindfolded, hold hands, lay on the floor on their stomachs, and one would say, "Are you there?" And the other would reply, "Yes," at which point the one who asked, "Are you there?" would then try to smack the other one in the head. This would repeat in a cycle, and points would be scored. So, Victorians were not all sticks in the mud, really. So, about how you could smack, a friend or an enemy, right? This is the lesson of the obelisk from 2001. So, there's this literal idea of extending the reach, extending the force with which you can deal a blow. And then you can think a little bit more metaphorically, things like the telescope extends the eye, you can see further, allows you to do things that you could not do unaugmented. And then, perhaps even a little more metaphorically, you can think about the wheel, which in reality is a kind of a diagram, a physical diagram of a foot in motion. It's the idea, provides forward motion. Another point I'd like to sort of bring up that is sometimes lost is that all technology is social. And that's because technology always arises from social contexts. And often, it's presented as a solution to a communal problem. And it is sort of extending, in the same way, in a McLuhan-esque way, it sort of extends the social body. And because the technology participates in the social and vice versa, it's often hard to separate those two things out if you look very hard at it. John Culkin, who was sort of pre-McLuhanite in the 1960s, was the one who said, the Psalm said it first, but he said it in a secular way, that we shape our tools, and thereafter our tools shape us. Of course, now we also have explicitly social media. So these are these strange electronic systems that not only represent our social graphs and represent the data in some way, but also attempt to enhance them, strengthen them, and work on our behalf in some way. Technology is not neutral. And this is a fairly controversial statement, but I believe that technology is not neutral. The counter argument is that technology is not good or bad. It just depends on how you use it. But if you think about it very hard, since technology is extending and amplifying human agency, or what we can do, with any given technology, there are certain biases. Certain technologies will enhance or reduce or foreclose options just by the nature of what the technology is. Abraham Maslow said that if you've got a hammer, that all problems start to look like a nail. A little later, Neil Postman, who was an American media critic, said that if you've got a pencil, everything looks like a list. If you've got a camera, everything looks like an image. And if you've got a computer, everything looks like data. And if you've got a Vickers machine gun, everything looks like a target. There are not too many other useful things you can do with a machine gun, except shoot. So you can imagine if you rain machine guns down on a country, there's a certain way that this machine and technology wants to be used. The problem is, until you're immersed in it, and even then, it's sometimes really difficult to figure out what those biases in any particular technology are going to be. It's just not clear. This is, I think, becoming clearer. Technology tends towards autonomy. Isaac Asimov, famously said that a thrown spear declares a certain independence once it leaves the thrower's hand. In other words, you can plan and target, but once you throw that spear, it's going to go where it goes, and it's no longer in your control. And our tools, especially as they become more complex, often gain either by intent or omission a certain kind of autonomy. Interestingly, the US Air Force has just published a white paper, and that by 2047, they expect combat drones to make combat decisions in the field autonomously. This particular thing is the Honeywell Tarantula Hawk. Not supposed to be a weapon, but a hover and stare drone that you can launch from a backpack. But my question is, what will we look like to these machines? Now, technology in general. I want to talk a little about digital technology. This is a sort of flavor of technology. It's a different kind of technology, and we deal with it a lot in design. There are certain advantages to digital technology, but there are also some great limitations. So, first of all, why is it digital and what's it opposed to? It's digital opposed to analog. Analog machines are an analogy. They're analogous to something. So the analog clock that everybody's familiar with is analogous to the continuous passage of time. There's almost infinite gradation between one point on this dial and another as the hand sweeps across it, much like the way we experience time. This guy, however, is a little bit different. It's 12:38 until it's 12:39. And there's no ambiguity in that. There's a sampling rate with this kind of system of once per minute, and that's it. This kind of technology, this digital way of representing information, is really useful for a lot of things. For one, it's easy to represent to a machine. It's also easy to transmit, store, manipulate, and, most interestingly, duplicate ad infinitum without loss. So it's useful. And if we go ahead and think about McLuhan's idea about extending the body, network digital technology really is extending our central nervous system. It's putting our agency out into the world in a very particular way. But there are downsides. Phil talked earlier about a map, not only a map but also an art can never be a perfect representation. Baudrillard talked about a one-to-one scale map. Bordet did. Lewis Carroll did.
as a kind of an insanity or an aberration. But there's something inherent in the way that digitalization works that is inherently lossy. Information is always lost in any digital process. And we'll take a little, I want to do a quick little example with the idea of sound. So this is a graphic representation of a sine wave, an oscillation. So this is what sound, sort of a pure tone, would look like if you graphed it. And this is an analog to the sweep of the frequencies. So time is this way, amplitude or loudness is this way. When we digitize it, the first thing we have to do is figure out a time scale and slice the time up. And then so-called quantization. So you take an intersection between the beautiful curved sine wave and the slices in time, and you wind up with something like this. When you remove the original, you wind up with this. So you wind up with this sort of stair-step representation. This is true of all digital technology. Taking a digital photograph, using digital video, recording digital audio, any process which is going to take continuous, analogous information we experience the world with and make it digital, this is what you wind up with. What's interesting when you re-superimpose those is this little green area right here. Because that's the area of loss. Whatever was here in the original is now irrevocably gone. Now, this actually has some interesting art-making potential to be able to get in there, but if you're not aware of it, it causes some problems. And one of the problems that comes up, especially that I see with students, is they think that digital technology is liberating and freeing and opens up all kinds of possibilities. But because of its very nature, the very structure of it, certain choices have always been foreclosed before you get there. So this is a menu from Photoshop. You'll notice that, between gradient map and photo filter, there's not another option there, right? It's either that or that. And somebody in San Jose, a software engineer, has already decided what this tool can do before you ever double click on it. Worse than that, I think, you have tools like a paintbrush. And if you have a tablet, you can get pressure sensitivity for your paintbrush. And so you have this illusion that you're somehow doing natural media or emulated natural media. But how many levels of pressure do you suppose an artist, a trained artist with a brush, can get on a canvas? Because in software like this, you're limited to 258 or 256 levels, or at best maybe 1,024 levels. And the human hand is many times more sensitive than that. So there's this built-in falling through the cracks, those sort of gaps that happen with all digital technology. So, as an artist, what can you do? I see really two possibilities. The first one is make your own tools. This, in the digital era, has been traditionally really difficult. This is the hard one. This is the one with the steep learning curve. But more and more, there are tools that are becoming available, things like processing, things like Max MSP, things like Arduino, which are programming environments, but they are so much higher level. In other words, they're so much more accessible to people who are not career programmers, that people can start to assemble their own tools. And when you do that, you are reclaiming, you're still dealing with the digital, there's still this idea of loss, but now you're reclaiming the universe of choices and of agency again, that you can do something more productive with, and something that you can have a much finer engagement at the grain of the digital material. So that's one option. The other option is to break someone else's. This one is a lot more immediate, but no less gratifying, because software is, as has been experienced even tonight, prone to failure. And particularly overdriving it, underdriving it, giving it the wrong data, can create really interesting results. So if you can break a piece of software, suddenly you, not some engineer somewhere, have agency and intent and determination of what the tool can do. It's a very good place to be creative. There's also the possibility of being massively, radically transdisciplinary and wind up using a piece of software that was designed for some very specific purpose over here, in a way over here the designer would never, ever have thought of. I point to one of my favorite sound artists is a guy named Karsten Nikolai, or Alvinoto is his recording name. And he did almost a whole album once that consisted entirely of PowerPoint files, Word documents, and emails that he had taken and stripped the headers out, put a new header on to tell his software that it was a sound file, and then played it. And it didn't sound like anything you've ever heard. It was this incredibly creative and fruitful endeavor. So, all of this to get to the point where I just want to say, kill your software. Learn to make new tools. There's all kinds of things available, and if you can't or don't want to, fine, break something. Because those are really the two ways to move forward in terms of having ownership of your tools in a digital environment. Thank you.